The doors are closing when the first woman slips into the courtyard. She has come before sunrise, before bargaining voices, before carts begin groaning through the street. Smoke is already gathering above the temple wall. The bricks still hold the nights cool. Inside the court the air is warm, with oil, ash, wool and breath. Other women are already there. Dust on their hems, veils drawn low. Hands tight at their sides. A boy has crept in too far and knows it. He has wedged himself behind a pillar where he can see the passing feet and not much else. Priests move by him in linen and heavy fringe. One carries a bowl. One carries a torch. One carries a tablet wrapped in cloth. Ahead is another doorway. Narrower, darker, guarded. That door is not for everybody. A name moves through the smoke. Tammuz. Then another. Ishtar. The women lower their heads. The chant begins so softly it sounds at first like somebody trying not to sob. Then it gathers shape. The boy can hear grief. He can smell cedar and burnt grain. He can feel that the real center of the rite is one room deeper than he has allowed to go. That may have been Babylon's oldest power. Not just belief. Depth. Not just spectacle. Thresholds. A city where you could witness enough to be shaken and still not know what happened behind the next door.
This is Tom Mackenzie, and you are listening to Unexplained History. If you wanted to invent the first great hidden religion, you would start here. With smoke behind guarded doors, with names like Ishtar and Tammuz, with a feeling that the people closest to the ritual know something the rest of the city only tastes in the air, and with one dangerous possibility. What if Babylon did not just worship its gods? What if it built a sacred machine so deep, so secretive, and so unforgettable that later ages never stopped mistaking its shadow for a living thing?
Babylon makes that idea feel plausible because the real city was already too large for ordinary language. This was not a place where religion sat in a corner and waited for the state to finish speaking. Religion was the state. Religion was legitimacy. Religion was labor. Religion was food accounting. Religion was the calendar. Religion was what told a king he still had the right to call himself king. Under Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon rose in walls, gates, processional roads, and temple complexes designed to make the human body feel small before the mind even caught up. You did not simply live in Babylon. You lived inside a hierarchy of nearness, near the outer street, near the processional way, near the court, near the storeroom, near the archive, near the inner chamber. Each step inward mattered. Each step inward belonged to somebody. Stay with one man for a moment. Call him Belatir, a temple official. Not a grand priest, not a king. Still close enough to sacred work to feel its pressure in his stomach. It is the month of Nizamu. Akitu is coming. The New Year festival will soon drag the whole city into motion. Belatir has barely slept. He has counted grain twice. Then a third time because twice did not calm him. He has argued about linen with a supplier who swears the delivery was complete. He has sent a boy to find a missing jar of oil, and then discovered it sitting exactly where it should have been. He has checked the worker roster. Checked it again. A festival like this is not pageantry to him. It is exposure. If the offerings arrive late, people notice. If the route is blocked, people notice. If a sacred object appears in the wrong order, people notice. And in Babylon, being noticed at the wrong moment is not just embarrassment. It feels like a tear in the fabric holding heaven and earth together. At dawn, he takes his place near a side entrance. Dust rises from sandals and hooves. Soldiers clear a path. Singers gather themselves in the half-light. Junior staff carry items they are trying very hard not to drop. Somewhere deeper in the complex, a divine image is being attended. Somewhere farther in, words are being spoken he will never hear. That matters. Belleteer is an insider by most standards, and even he lives by thresholds. He knows which room he may enter. He knows where he must stop. He knows whose office outranks his own. He knows which questions are stupid because they imply a right to know more. Then the king arrives, and Babylon becomes even stranger. In the ritual tradition tied to Akitu, the high priest removes the signs of royal power. Belleteer does not need to hear every word. He can read the change in the room. Men who would never meet his eye on the street are suddenly staring at the floor. The king stands before the god without the full theatre of kingship protecting him. No wall of soldiers can help him now. No gold can help him. No title can help him. He is close enough for once to be seen failing. Then comes the jolt. The priest strikes him, not as insult, as ritual, hard enough in the ideal form of the right to force tears into the king's eyes. Now imagine the silence after it. Not confusion. Suspense. Nobody rushes forward. Nobody speaks. The strongest man in the city has just been hit in the face, and all Babylon waits to see whether his eyes will fill. For 1 second, the empire narrows to that single detail. A cheek. A breath. A pair of eyes trying not to stay dry. Did the king weep? Did the god accept him? Has he failed in some hidden way? The king swears he has not neglected the god. If tears come, the sign is good. If they do not, the air goes tight. That is the unforgettable part. Not that a priest can strike a king. That a kingdom this vast still needs to watch for one involuntary human thing. Water in the eye. Proof that the throne answers upward. Inside these walls, a priest can halt the whole imperial performance with one blow and one searching look. To later generations, that kind of scene feels like secret dominion. To Babylon, it was sacred order made visible. But from the outer court, those two things can look almost identical. The crowd sees movement, hears chant, smells cedar smoke, watches guarded objects pass through doors it cannot follow, and goes home with one strong impression. The city has levels. The gods have staff. Somebody, somewhere, knows more. That impression will survive long after the bricks are gone.
Then come the names that keep the whole story from becoming dry old administration. Ishtar, Inanna, Tammuz. Now, Babylon stops sounding organized. Now it sounds dangerous.
Secret history theories do not grow out of dull gods. They grow out of gods who leave bruises on the imagination. Mesopotamia had them. Take Enheduanna. Royal daughter, high priestess. Poet, a woman from deep antiquity whose hymns to Inanna helped shape the long afterlife of a goddess later known in Akkadian as Ishtar. Do not picture a textbook summary. Picture a voice trained for a temple room. Picture words built to be spoken aloud where lamplight shakes against stone and metal. In those hymns, the goddess is not gentle background religion. She is desire and war, seduction and terror. splendor and threat. She can bless a throne. She can break one. That is exactly the kind of divine personality later ages cannot leave alone. Now move forward. A scribe sits with wet clay on his lap and a stylus in his hand. He is copying an old composition about Inanna's descent. One sign. Then another. He cannot afford drift. A missing mark distorts a word. A distorted word disturbs a recitation. A disturbed recitation travels. What he is copying is already ancient to him. Already layered. Already carried through languages, memories, revisions, and fragments saved because somebody kept pressing signs into clay before the light failed. At the center of that larger sacred world stands another figure, Dumazide. Later, Tammuz. Beloved. Shepherd. Absent God. Mourned God. A figure tangled with grief, seasonal loss, and the ache of return. Not in one clean, modern plot. In laments. In songs. In ritual memory. In pieces that still carry feeling even when the full world around them is gone. That feeling matters. Centuries later, the prophet Ezekiel describes women weeping for Tammuz. Whatever he thought of the rite, the image survived because it was hard to forget. Women mourning a sacred figure. Public grief shaped into ceremony. A scene intense enough to travel into scripture as a warning. Pause there. Not on doctrine, on the human pressure. A woman in Babylon has lost a child the previous year. Another has buried 2 infants across the course of her life. Another fears what a failed river season might bring. When the lament begins, they are not attending a puzzle for later conspiracy writers. They are pushing private pain into a sacred pattern old enough to hold it. The lamentation priest knows where the chant must rise. He knows when it must catch in the throat. He knows where the voices should splinter into crying and where they must draw back into formal lines. He is not inventing emotion. He is disciplining it. This is one reason Babylon feels so uncanny from a distance. The rites are emotional without being loose. Controlled without being cold. Ancient without being dead. Put Ishtar beside Tammuz and the pattern starts pulsing. A powerful goddess. A mourned male figure. Descent. Loss. Lament. Hints of return. Rites outsiders can witness but not decode. From far enough away, that does not look like one complicated religious world among many. It looks like source code. And distance is a dangerous editor. Distance smooths out contradiction. Distance fuses local rites into one imagined system. Distance makes resemblance feel like ancestry. By now, Babylon has given the theory almost everything it needs. Atmosphere. Power. Thresholds. Grief. What it still needs are human keepers. The people who seem to hold the keys.
If you want to turn Babylon into the mother of all secret religion, this is where you do it. Not with the gods. With the specialists. The ones who can read what others cannot read. The ones who know which words belong on which day. The ones who vanish through the next door while everyone else waits outside.
They were real. Not fantasy cultists in hoods. Specialists, scribes, diviners, exorcists, lamentation priests, temple women, administrators, singers, workers handling grain, textiles, oil vessels, animals, and offerings for the god's household. To a modern ear, some of that sounds bureaucratic. In Babylon, it was cosmic maintenance. Feed the divine image. Clothe it. House it. Purify its rooms. Recite the right words. Observe the right sign. Deliver the right offering on the right day. If any of that slipped, people did not think, well, the office had a rough morning. They thought order itself might be exposed. That becomes clearer if we follow a few people through one hard day. Before sunrise, a junior scribe named Nabu Resh is sent to fetch a tablet from storage. He breaks the seal on the basket. Wrong text. Not the Omens series. A hymn. His mouth goes dry. He knows the senior scholar needs the other tablet now. He knows the room will go still when he arrives with the wrong thing. He knows a mistake here is not small. It interrupts a chain of words people believe protects the city. So he runs. Up a stair. Down a corridor. Past a clerk carrying waxed writing boards. Past a woman counting jars. Past a doorway he is not meant to block. He is just one young man with the wrong tablet in his hands. But to him, the whole temple seems ready to punish a single failure. Elsewhere, on a roof under the paling sky, a diviner studies the last position of the moon. Call him Marduk Nasir. He has spent years learning lists that most people in the city will never hear read aloud. If the sign is bad, the palace must know. If the palace knows, ritual response may follow. If ritual response follows, more officials move, more texts come down from shelves, more lives bend around a warning from above. He is not watching the heavens for poetry. He is waiting for consequences. Go lower. Back to the storerooms and work courts. A temple woman counts barley into containers and counts again because a short measure becomes somebody else's accusation by noon. A brewer inspects jars for spoilage. A singer repeats a line under her breath until it settles into muscle memory. A lamentation priest rehearses with the fear that if he speaks too flatly, the rite dies, and if he overplays it, the rite becomes theatre. An exorcistic specialist lays out objects in sequence and repeats formulas no apprentice may decorate. Everywhere you look, the pattern is the same. Technique. Hierarchy. Restricted access. Pressure. The god's house is a workplace. It is also a machine for making outsiders feel that knowledge itself lives behind doors. And on a bad week, that feeling sharpens. If fever starts moving through households, if the river behaves strangely, if a military report arrives from the frontier, if the moon does something people do not expect, then these specialists stop looking like administrators. They start looking like the only people left who can still read reality. Imagine a traveler passing through Babylon and hearing bits of this world without understanding how the pieces fit. He sees one man studying the sky, another carrying a wrapped tablet behind a guarded door, another chanting over grief, another purifying a room, another watching a king submit himself to temple ritual. What does he report when he gets home? Something simple. Babylon knows things we do not. That is not a lie. It is just the beginning of a much larger one, because sacred specialization is real. A single hidden doctrine guiding all later history is something else entirely. Still, you can feel why people make the leap. Fragments are compelling. Hidden depth is compelling. And a city built on thresholds almost begs later ages to imagine one final door at the center.
Here is the moment the rabbit hole widens. Once Babylon has smoke, guarded rooms, priests, lamentation, star readers, and a king who can be slapped before a god, it stops looking local. It starts looking ancestral, like the first draft of every later secret rite somebody ever feared.
In its strongest form, the theory says Babylon did not merely practice religion. It perfected a hidden template. Its priests encoded sacred kingship, divine motherhood, mourning rites, celestial signs, guarded knowledge, and death and return symbolism into a system that outlived the empire itself. The walls fell. The system moved on, into later mystery cults, into imperial religion, into secret orders, into the modern world. You can hear why that spreads. It takes 1,000 years of mess and gives you one key: find a resemblance. Walk backward to Babylon. Incense. Vestments. A queen of heaven. A mourning rite. A procession. A sacred meal. A mother and child image. A hidden office. The theory invites every symbol to testify. And Babylon, being Babylon, keeps helping. The city is old enough to feel primal. Biblical enough to arrive preloaded with judgment. Vast enough to make any fragment seem like part of a bigger lost architecture. This is where the famous package begins to harden. Nimrod. Semiramis. Tammuz. The rebel king. The queen. The child. The original false religion. The prototype for corruption ever after. It is clean. Too clean. History almost never arrives this well-groomed. But clean stories travel farther than tangled ones. A hidden mother religion is easier to preach than parallel development, borrowing, adaptation, translation, memory, and coincidence. One poisoned root is easier to teach than a forest. Sooner or later, though, atmosphere is not enough. Somebody has to build the machine. Somebody has to gather the fragments, sand off the edges, and tell readers that the whole pattern can now be seen. That is where the later interpreters enter. And once they do, Babylon stops being only an ancient city. It becomes a weapon.
This is the part I love and distrust at the same time. The study. The lamp. The stack of books. The writer convinced that all the loose pieces in history finally want to lock together in his hands.
In the 19th century, Alexander Hislop sits in exactly that kind of atmosphere. Scottish minister. Pages open. References spread around him. The old name's already warm with biblical heat. He is not standing in Babylon. He is standing in an argument. And he is trying to give that argument an ancient root system. Watch the method at work. A resemblance appears. He leans toward it. A title echoes another title. A ritual detail seems familiar. A symbol feels too similar to ignore. A name from scripture meets a name from the ancient world. Instead of leaving them adjacent, he fastens them together. Nimrod here. Semiramis there. Tammuz in the emotional center. A comparison becomes a connection. A connection becomes lineage. A lineage becomes indictment. You can feel the danger in that progression. Once every resemblance is treated like a footprint, history stops being a landscape. It becomes a manhunt. That is the engine of the two Babylons. The book does not merely say Babylon influenced later imagination in broad ways. It says later church practices and symbols can be traced back to an ancient corrupt source. That is a much hotter claim. It gives readers an enemy older than memory. It gives modern suspicion an origin story. and it gives every ornate ceremony a suspect ancestor waiting in the wings. There is a ruthless brilliance to that. The argument saves the reader labor. He does not need cuneiform. He does not need to sort Sumerian from Akkadian, Assyrian from Babylonian, old evidence from late legend, or emotional resemblance from documented descent. The theory does that work for him, or seems to. It offers the pleasure of discovery without the burden of historical mess. That is why it moves. A century later, Ralph Woodrow helps carry the same framework to a mass audience in Babylon Mystery Religion. Now the room changes. Mid-20th century. Paperbacks. Charts. A teacher laying out the case so ordinary readers can hold centuries in one hand. Mother and child. Queen of heaven. Priests. Vestments. Incense. Mysteries. The argument becomes portable, visual, repeatable. It can move by tract, sermon, cassette, radio, paperback, photocopy, and later by glowing screen. It no longer needs a library to survive. It just needs a listener already primed to believe that hidden continuity is more satisfying than broken history. That is what makes it unstable. The cleaner the chart, the more it hides the welds. The easier it is to repeat, the harder it is to stop. And every time the theory is repeated, the ancient city fades a little more. Belatir disappears. The women in the courtyard disappear. The scribe with wet clay on his lap disappears. In their place rises a cleaner Babylon. One built less by ancient religion than by later need. That may be the key question in this whole episode. Not only what happened in Babylon. What did later writers need Babylon to be? A single dark source is useful. Useful for polemic. Useful for preaching. Useful for turning a world of complicated overlap into one grand accusation. And useful stories can survive weak joints for a very long time. But weak joints still creak. Eventually somebody hears it.
This is where the floor begins to shift under the theory, because the famous bloodline sounds ancient. But the closer you lean in, the more it starts sounding arranged.
Start with Nimrod. In Genesis, he is brief. A mighty man, a mighty hunter. Associated with the early kingdom that includes Babel. That is the hard biblical core. The enormous symbolic career he takes on in later Babylon theories comes from expansion piled on expansion. Now Semiramis. There is a historical echo behind the name. An Assyrian queen called Shamuramad existed in the 9th century BCE. But the grand Semiramis of later imagination is far larger than that historical shadow. Ancient writers enlarged her. Later writers enlarged her again. By the time polemical tradition is done, she can be queen, mother, seductress, priestess, empire builder, and origin point all at once. That kind of flexibility is excellent for propaganda. It is not the same thing as firm history. Then Tammuz. Here the theory touches something real. Tammuz belongs to ancient Mesopotamian religion. The mourning associations are real. The emotional charge is real. That is why the larger package persuades people. It does not fabricate everything out of thin air. It braids solid ancient material together with weak bridges. Enough truth to make the leap feel earned. Enough invention to carry the leap further than the evidence safely goes. That is one crack. The other arrives with a far more human scene. Picture Ralph Woodrow years after helping popularize the framework. The book is out in the world. The argument has an audience. People know his name for this material. And then he goes back to the sources, back to the claims, back to the links that look strongest when presented as a chain. This is not a glamorous scene. No temple smoke. No processional road. Just a writer discovering that some of the cleanest parts of the story are also the least stable. The kind of discovery that turns a desk into a trap. A citation that does not carry the weight people put on it. A connection that turns out to be a jump. A famous lineage that works better as rhetoric than evidence. There is real drama in that, because recantation has a cost. It means admitting the machine that gave you authority is not as solid as it sounded. It means putting your hand on the beam and feeling the whole house shiver. It means giving up a story that travels well for a harder one that limps. Woodrow eventually distances himself from the framework he once helped spread. That does not settle every argument by itself. But it tells you something important. Even inside the tradition, the joints were rattling. And once you start checking the chain link by link, one more problem rises to the surface. The term itself. Historians do not treat Babylonian religion as a classical mystery religion in the later Greco-Roman sense. That distinction matters. Babylon had restricted knowledge. It had sacred specialists. It had hierarchy, thresholds, guarded rites and ceremonies outsiders could not fully read. All true. But that is not the same as one monolithic initiatory religion passing intact into later churches, cults, or secret societies. That stronger claim is where the floor drops. And when it drops, something unexpected happens. The real city comes back into view.
That is my favorite kind of turn. Not when the mystery dies. When it gets harder, because the real Babylon is less tidy than the conspiracy version. And somehow more haunting.
The softer truth should come late. Babylon really was mysterious. Just not in the cheap, catch-all way. In the hard way. In the lived way. In the way a sacred world becomes difficult to reconstruct once its language, routine, and assumptions are gone. Go back to the courtyard. The woman hears the lament for Tammuz. Smoke drifts past her face. She knows the rite matters. She does not know every chamber behind the next door. Neither does the boy by the pillar. Neither does the laborer unloading grain. Neither does Belatir. Not even the king moves through that world without limits. Babylonian religion was layered. Role-bound. Temple-centered. Civic. Dynastic. Technical. Full of gods, duties, calendars, offerings, chants, archives, and specialists trying to keep heaven and earth in alignment. That is why historians draw a line here. The Greco-Roman label mystery religion usually belongs to later initiation cults with their own forms of secrecy and membership. Babylon gives us something older and different. Not a neat prototype of Eleusis tucked inside the clay. A temple civilization with restricted expertise and sacred drama intense enough to tempt later ages into forcing the fit. And once you let the real people back in, the city becomes more interesting than the grand theory. A scribe pressing signs into wet clay before the light goes. A priest watching a king for tears. A sky reader with dread in his stomach. Women weeping for Tammuz. A singer trying to land the lament exactly right. Belatir counting grain again because the god's household must still run tomorrow. That is not a universal secret religion hiding behind every later curtain. It is something more stubborn. A real sacred system, local and immense at once, powerful enough to leave silhouettes in the minds of people who no longer understood its inner logic. You can see now why Hislop wanted one villainous origin story. Why Woodrow first found it persuasive. Why the theory still thrives wherever people prefer one hidden engine to 1,000 visible causes. But you can also see what the theory flattens. Chronology, difference, borrowing, adaptation, coincidence. The fact that resemblance is not always inheritance. The fact that ancient religions echo one another without belonging to one secret chain. No documented unbroken line from Babylon into every later faith. No securely established Nimrod Semiramis Tammuz master triad running world religion from behind the curtain. But not nothing. Never nothing. Smoke survived. Doorways survived. The memory of sacred depth survived. And that was enough for later centuries to keep drawing new maps across the ruins.
Maybe that is the real haunting thing about Babylon. Not that it secretly became every later religion. That would make history smaller. The real haunting thing is that the city was powerful enough and half lost enough to be rewritten again and again.
Evening settles over Babylon. The heat loosens its grip on the brick. The Euphrates goes on moving in the dark. Somewhere, a tablet is drying. Somewhere, a vessel is being washed for tomorrow's rite. Somewhere, a singer still has the lament in her throat. Somewhere, Marduk Nasir is wondering whether he read the sky correctly. Somewhere, Nabu Resh is hoping no one remembers the wrong tablet. Somewhere, Belatir is checking stores one last time because dawn will come whether the god's house is ready or not. And above all of them, the temple keeps its inner rooms. Dark, silent, still withholding the last door. This is the Babylon that matters most at the end. Not a universal secret religion hiding behind all later history. A real sacred city. Huge, difficult, alive with obligation. A place where people try to keep disorder back with ritual, memory, discipline, and repetition because they believed one mistake could let chaos in. That world did not need to survive unchanged to cast a long shadow. It only needed to be vivid. Vivid enough that later centuries standing in the outer court of history kept imagining one more guarded door. Vivid enough that a minister in Scotland could turn it into a master accusation. Vivid enough that a later popularizer could carry that accusation to a new audience. Vivid enough that the names Ishtar and Tammuz still sound even now like they belong to a room we have not fully entered. Maybe the final mystery is not continuity. Maybe it is what happens when memory outlives understanding. How a civilization can die, fragment, be translated, moralized, weaponized, and half forgotten, and still remain enormous, still remain magnetic. Still make us feel, from just outside the threshold, that somebody inside knows more. That the lamps are burning in there even now. That if the door opened a hand's width, we might finally understand the city. And might, instead, only hear the lament begin again.
Babylon did not have to become the mother of every later faith to become one of history's most haunted names. It only had to be real. And deep enough that we are still standing in the outer court, staring through the smoke. I'm Tom Mackenzie, and this has been Unexplained History.